I think we've got some movement. I think we're going to get some things that that are going to make the country a safer place in which to live, and we're going to be able to do it without infringing on anybody's constitutional rights. The Second Amendment's pretty clear. People have a right to own guns, and nobody's going to take anybody's guns away from them. But there are steps that need to be taken that will make sure that people who are dangerously mentally ill or people who are criminals don't get guns.
Give us the specifics.
Yeah, pardon me?
Give us the specifics, if you would.
Well, I think we're going to get background checks for all gun sales. There'll probably be exceptions in that, for immediate family transfers. There'll be an exception also for what they call transfers for sporting purposes, hunting and sporting purposes, which is, I think, kind of a misnomer. Basically, what it means is if you come up to my house and we're going to target shoot or go hunting or something, and I loan you a gun for that purpose, there doesn't have to be any background check.
Because it's not for ownership, is the idea?
Yeah, it's not for ownership. You're doing it under supervised conditions of wherever it is you're hunting or wherever you're shooting skeet or target practicing. And there'll probably be some provision in the exemption or exception portion of the bill that stipulates that you can't have any reason to believe that somebody's dangerously mentally ill and or a criminal. So if you come to my house and I say we're going to go shoot skeet, and you say I don't have a gun, I say, well, I don't have any reason to believe you're dangerously mentally ill or a criminal, and so you can use my gun to do it.
So what about if somebody comes to your house and we're going out sport shooting and we shoot sport, and you at the end of that tell me, yeah, just take the gun, don't need it.
Background check.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the Lautenberg legislation calls for checks at gun shows as defined by more than 50 guns for sale at a certain place. Is there legislation out there that already that would cover all of these private transfers other than immediate families and stuff?
I don't know what Lautenberg is doing, but folks seem to believe that this working group in the Senate is the working groups that is going to produce the background check bill that will come out of the Senate. Peter King and I are working on legislation in the House, and we're working with the mayor's group and some other folks to put that bill together, and it'll probably be pretty close to what the Senate does.
Okay, so we got
background checks.
Background checks. What else?
Trafficking. There'll be a new law that stiffens the penalty for trafficking firearms. Straw purchases. We're going to try, and I don't know. We're working on it. I don't know where we go with it. We're going to try and incentivize the program that California has called Armed and Prohibited, and that's a program. It works well in California. It's just terribly understaffed. But there are a lot of people. As a matter of fact, there are 19,000 people, according to DOJ records, who legally bought firearms in California and legally owned those firearms. And subsequent to the purchase, became prohibited from owning firearms. And this DOJ program tracks these folks down and then gets the firearms out of their possession. And they either help them sell them, help them transfer them to somebody who's not prohibited, or take them in as part of the gun turn-in program. And that's a hard one, and the reason we're trying to go about it through incentives is it works in California because handguns and assault weapons are registered in California, and those firearms, every state doesn't have the same rules. So if we incentivize it, there may be more states that come on board and put something on the books.
So
there'll be.
So that's trafficking. You talked trafficking, and then you talked about, I don't know, you want to call it repossess. I don't know, what would you call it, Josh? Repossessing?
Well, it's removing guns from people who are no longer allowed to have them.
Right,
basically.
which goes back to the first one about dangerously mentally ill and criminals, right? I mean, I'm trying to think of this in an organized fashion, right? So you'd have, that goes to the, we're going to do background checks,
Well,
and then we're going to try and take away from people who are no longer, who become ineligible.
But that would not be different in California.
California already has it.
California already has
But
it.
they don't have, they've got, as I say, 19,000 people, an estimated 40,000 firearms in the hands of people who are prohibited, and they have a small budget, 33 people at DOJ that's working on it.
And that doesn't cover long guns other than regulated assault weapons.
Right. Yeah, so that they estimate 40,000 guns, and that's based on, and I think that estimation is probably more than an estimate, probably accurate count, and it's based on handguns and assault weapons. But
because they had to be registered in the first place.
Correct.
People know that the.
Yeah. And I'm with you. I would bet you that anybody that has 2 or 3 pistols and an assault weapon probably has a rifle and a shotgun or 2. So it's probably
or 6.
Yeah. So you're right. It's probably closer to 80,000 guns that are in the hands of people, of 19,000 people who are prohibited in California from owning a firearm.
Do you know how many per year or something that they actually get off of the street of those?
I heard that number when DOJ was briefing me, and I just don't recall what it was. So.
I have something from their last sweep. They put out numbers in December. I can forward that to you.
What about assault weapons?
It's going to be very difficult to do assault weapons. That's a hard one. It's on our list of recommendations. Where are the lists? It's on our list, and the 15 points that we put out. We did that on a 2/3 vote of our task force, and assault weapons are on the list, as are assault magazines. The magazines.
Why is it, wait a minute, but when you say it's going to be difficult to do assault weapons, difficult
Because there's not the votes, to get in the votes to do it will be real tough.
But you got 2/3 in your task force.
Correct.
And that's because that task force is not as representative of the membership.
No, it's not anywhere close.
Okay.
It was all Democrats. There were the 3 hardcore gun owners, hunters on the task force. The assault magazine principle, I think will be easier to get. There seems to be some cross-party line support for that, more so than the assault weapons. Yeah, and the other, and the reason
would that would be a magazine similar to the one used against
anything over 10 shots.
10 shots. Okay.
So, and they would be banned. Would be what?
Would be banned.
But existing ones would be grandfathered, and they'd be allowed to keep them.
Grandfather. Now there's some ideas out there. There's some ideas floating around that would provide for buybacks of both assault weapons and assault magazines. Something like that could possibly pass. I know Rosa DeLaura has legislation that would provide a tax credit of, I think, a couple $1,000s for anyone who turns in an assault weapon. I believe Jackie Spears is working on something similar for the assault magazines.
So what I hear you saying, if I'm correct, is we can't even get Feinstein's old bill back.
I said it'd be real tough.
Yeah.
I'm not going to foreclose on
right,
it, but it's
the
going to be
assault
real
weapons
tough.
ban, as we used to know it back in 1994.
It's going to be real tough.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting subject because I would contend that without the assault magazine, an assault weapon is somewhat neutered. They're so dangerous because you put a 30-shot or a 100-shot magazine in there, you can just shoot all day. And a good example of this is the Gabby Gifford shooting. That guy had 33 rounds in a handgun, and when he dropped that magazine to reload, that's when somebody subdued him.
Why would you grandfather in the existing
Well, I wouldn't.
I know.
If it were me, there wouldn't be assault weapons, and there wouldn't be assault magazines.
What's the rationale? How
Because
yeah, I mean,
because there are millions of them out there, and it's going to be just really, really difficult, if not impossible, to corral them all and get them out of the.
So
I just don't know how you do it.
Political practicality.
Yeah, and the same thing's true with the assault weapons. You know, there's somewhere between 4 and 20 million assault weapons that are in circulation right now. But without the assault magazine, they've become semi-automatic rifles that aren't very aesthetically pleasing.
And so the idea is that the idea would be then you would not be allowing import, production, etc.
Exactly.
Sale.
Exactly.
In other words, rather than trying to cut it off the ownership, well, you would be banning the ownership. How would you, I guess here's what I don't understand. How are you going to go into somebody's house?
You won't.
And distinguish between an old one and a new one?
You won't. That's it. Well, you have to stop the production and the sale of them.
Okay. So it's not that you're going to ban ownership; it's you're going to ban production and
Correct.
sale. Okay.
Would current owners be prohibited from transferring them to
Correct.
anybody else?
What about gun collector exemption that exists, or private collection?
You mean on the for the fully automatics?
Right.
Well, there's already law in the books for that, and that's not going to go away. There's the fully automatic weapons. There's a set amount of those in existence. There's a pretty high bar to obtain a license to own one of those, and a pretty expensive bar as well. And those are governed under specific federal legislation.
So if you had to describe what we're going to see come out of this, best case scenario.
Best case scenario, those 15 principles.
Okay.
And
but best case politically realistic scenario.
well, I'm going to stick with the 15 principles.
Okay.
I'm not throwing in the towel. I'm going to push for this stuff. And if you're asking me to prioritize, I would prioritize as the most important principles would be the background checks, the gun trafficking, the straw purchases, the assault magazines, from the gun-related parts of this. But this also covers mental health, culture of violence, all that's important as well. And I think we probably get some mental health changes as a result of what we're doing. There's going to be all kinds of ancillary proposals that have a real good shot of passing. I'm looking at a safe storage proposal, and I did that in California. Provided liability for people who don't take care of their firearms, and that was a bill that was backed by the NRA. Was passed by the legislature with probably near, if not total support, signed by a Republican governor. I'm looking at some tax incentives for purchasing gun safes. So we're looking at everything, and I think we're going to get a little bit more than the naysayers
Why
think.
would you give tax incentives for gun safes? I mean,
To get people to buy them.
I'm trying to understand.
Same reason we give tax incentives
Well,
for
I know, I mean,
conserving property.
we
and
give a
watersheds.
lot of tax incentives that are really questionable, and I'm just trying to say if you mandate a gun safe, then
Pretty hard to mandate gun sales.
Well,
Okay.
first of all, if you mandate gun safes, you don't get the bill.
Don't what?
You don't get the bill.
Well, yeah, but it'd be pretty hard to do it. There's people that you're not going to. There's old people that live in houses that where their guns are locked in a closet, and you're not going to buy a gun safe. And I don't think you
Okay.
get it. But if you provide an incentive for people to buy them, It may cost a little bit of money, but my God, think how much it costs when they have one of these mass shootings.
Well, how do you do a tax incentive that isn't basically progressive, if you will? You know, I mean, the value of the incentive, if it's an income tax incentive,
well,
becomes
the bigger problem on the whole issue of incentivizing the purchase of gun safes through the tax code is where you cut it off. You're not going to do full credit for the purchase of the safe. It's just going to be an incentive. If you did it any other way, it would be terribly regressive, because the multi-bazillionaire gun collector is going to knock out the bottom story of their house and make it a huge walk-in gun room and send you the bill for $2.5 million. And we're not going to do that. It's just going to be a small.
Is it going to be a tax credit?
We're working on all that right now.
Okay. All right.
Well, talk about the mental health aspect of it a little bit. What are we looking at there? Because that seems to me to be a very important component that sometimes gets lost in the shuffle of all of this.
It's an extremely important component, but the thing that we really have to make sure is that the discussion about gun violence prevention doesn't get pushed off track and stuck in, pigeonholed in the mental health department. That's what some folks would like. That's what Wayne LaPierre would like to do.
Oh,
He'd
sure.
like to arm the teachers and push everything else over into mental health, which doesn't do everything that needs to be done and has never been fully funded. So what we're trying to do is look at on-the-ground programs that work in regard to mental health and see if we can't duplicate those in other areas. There's a program in the Washington, D.C. area that we heard about in one of our hearings. It's an early intervention program. They have good data that shows that it works. There's a program that I brought the director of mental health for Sonoma County out to our hearing. They have a program, early intervention, mobile intervention program, where they train students to do internships, and then they educate the schools and the faculty, and they have this mobile unit. If there's a problem, they'll go right out to the campus and provide the help that's necessary. So we're looking at programs such as that. There's some juvenile justice work that's been done by Bobby Scott from Virginia, who is a real leader in this area, and he's got a whole slug of programs that he believes will work to minimize these problems. And we're trying to get that exposure and get that attention to mental health and closing the gaps that exist. The other problem, and the more difficult problem to deal with regarding mental health, is the privacy issues, and that just becomes real thorny when you start working on it. But the truth of the matter is, it needs to be done. Mm-hmm. There's some people who, because of their mental state, should not be allowed to have firearms, and we need to figure out how we are able to identify those people without throwing civil liberties and civil rights out there.
And how you define that.
So you are looking then at sort of broadening the window of mental health contacts that would require a report to the NICS system. And what about
a real good example to that is the 5150s,
uh-huh.
the people who are mandated to go for observation. There's a period of time after they're out where they can't purchase a firearm. Mm-hmm. But if I go down or you go down voluntarily, we can get out after 72 hours of observation and go buy a gun.
Right.
And so that's I think that's just a real illustrative example of the problem.
And what about finding the right balance of carrot and stick to get states reporting that data adequately to NICS? Because that's been a problem in a lot of states, not in California so much.
It's been a terrible problem, and not just states, but jurisdictions within the state. And that's another area that we're working on. We have to make sure that the data is in the system, or the system doesn't work.
There's states' rights issues with that, though, in terms of compelling them to provide the information.
That's
you have to incentivize it, basically.
That's why the
right?
incentives are important.
All right. So how much federal funding are we willing to withhold from these jurisdictions and states to do that?
We're working on that. I think everybody recognizes, you can't argue that all we have to do is keep guns out of the hands of the mentally ill and the criminals. That's all we need. But then don't provide the mechanism by which this information goes in.
And are you talking about enhancing or increasing lowering the threshold when a mental health professional would have to report someone? Or?
Correct. Well, we're looking at how you report and on what you report. Those are the things we're trying to look through. A good example, I lost a good friend last year, city councilman up in Fort Bragg, Jerry Miller. He was killed point blank range with an AK-47. He was out on property that his company owned. He was looking for illegal grows. There was a guy there growing dope, shot him and killed him. And this guy was a Fort Bragg, either native or long-time resident of Fort Bragg. Everybody knew he had severe mental health issues, and everybody tried to get him help. His parents, his mom and dad tried to get him help. Local law enforcement, everybody tried to get him help. And he got no help because of the privacy laws that are out there. And had he, things might have worked out different. So we need to figure out ways when someone is in fact a danger to themselves or their community. There's a better mechanism by which they are directed to the help they need, and certainly prohibited from having any firearms.
Boy, and this goes so far beyond just guns.
Pardon me?
This goes so far beyond just guns.
Oh,
Yeah, we're wrestling with it right now because we have mandatory reporting in schools, and we're finding more and more and more and more cases where people, I'm not going to report it, and I wonder how much, how you can enforce that.
It is terribly difficult whenever you have any mandatory reporting for anything. And it's not just mental health, and I'll give you a good example. Tim Egan, who had he's since passed, but owned a big care facility in Marin County. He owns Vintage 1870 in the Napa Valley at Bellagio Hotel. He had a person working in his facility who another person caught abusing a patient, hitting them with a flexible water nozzle that used for shower. So they interceded, they got him away from the patient, they reported it to Egan right away. Egan reported it to the state right away to make sure this guy, he fired him and reported it and make sure that he wasn't hired again. So he was hit with, I think it was a $30,000 fine because he had this guy in his employment. So, just the system discourages, because he probably abused somebody else in his last job and was told to go away, so he wasn't fined. So there's a lot of problems in any type of mandatory reporting, and this is just one of those we've got to look through.
Can you talk about school safety? What you plan on with
it's
school
one
safety?
of our principles, and what we've heard from, I've heard a couple of very interesting points on this. I've heard from schools themselves, from faculty and administrators, that they need help with the infrastructure stuff on the schools. The one that was pointed out to me by a school in Sonoma County was the locks on the doors. If there's a lockdown, they have to go outside and lock the door. And it should be the other way around, and it's expensive to change them. The other very interesting point that was raised on this, when we had one of our hearings in Washington, we had a contractor from Florida who came to, he was a life member of the NRA, and he's hunted all around the world, big game hunter. Came in and he was there to testify about his thoughts on the gun side of this. It told us that he had 150 guns. He's hunted just about every place in the world imaginable where you can go hunting, and talked about background checks and the assault magazines, etc. And when the issue of school safety came up, he said, well, you know, I'm not here to talk about that, but in my day job, I'm a contractor, and I don't remember what he said, 40 schools or 50 schools in the Florida area. He said, and you need to know that there's no school that's been built in the foreseeable past has ever been built to be a lockdown, you know, compound. They've always been built to be open and accessible, and that's kind of the nature of a good learning environment. So if you think you're going to make fortresses out of these places, he says you're gravely mistaken. You know, there's not enough money in the world to retrofit all that.
Well, go ahead, sir.
You referred earlier to the NRA idea of arming teachers or janitors or whatever. We have a bill pending in the California legislature now from Tim Donnelly to do just that. He calls it the School Marshall Plan. Yeah, well, I guess I have my answer. I was going to ask what
well, well, we talked about my shooting the targets with Tom Brokaw, and I was fairly accurate. I had no pressure. I had a leaner on sandbags and a bench. I was sitting down. If I missed, I missed. I was out the price of a bullet, maybe a little nick to my pride. It's a whole different ball game when you're in a situation where there's an emergency. People are shooting at you. Kids are running, trying to be safe. You're trying to herd the kids into a safe place. Your adrenaline is, out the roof. People who are trained, law enforcement, military people who go through extensive training, more so than you could possibly put any teacher. And remember, a lot of teachers, they don't know. They don't have any interest in firearms, never held a firearm, have no interest in holding a firearm. That's a pretty big leap to think you could take that universe of people and train them to become proficient in a no-pressure situation, let alone in a high-pressure situation. I don't think that I don't think that works. I think we're better off preventing someone from having a gun who shouldn't have a gun. Once somebody shows up at the school with a gun in their hand and wanting to do harm to the students, I think it's probably too late.
I think the most compelling testimony on this issue in schools was the principal from Kentucky, and I don't know his name, but who was the principal of, there was a shooting in his school, 5 or 6 kids killed before they finally got the guy, it was a student, a shooter. And he's an NRA member and a big time hunter and all that. He said, folks, you're talking about a security guard in my school. He said, from the time we heard the first shot till the time we disarmed this kid, till we got him to the ground, and it was me and 2 other people. We've timed it. It was 12 seconds. How would an armed security guard, even if you're not arming the teachers, an armed security guard in a big campus, you're not going to have 12 of them, one for each. How would that play out? Other than, it doesn't seem to me it seems to me to be a false answer.
Well, Virginia Tech, didn't have a SWAT team or something was on campus when that happened. That stuff happens real quick. And whenever you hear that argument, you hear the same thing with the assault weapons. You hear, well, I need this to defend my family if somebody breaks in my house. My wife and I were talking about this the other morning, and yesterday morning, I guess. If I knew that my neighbors had bushmasters to defend themselves if someone broke in, I'd move. I mean, it makes no sense. They start shooting, those bullets are going to go through their windows and their walls, through my windows and my walls. The neighborhood's not safe. And somebody had called and asked me about, apparently Vice President Biden commented on the shotgun issue. And I said, he's absolutely correct. Why would you have a high caliber rifle that's going to go through your wall and shoot a pedestrian walking down the street, or the neighbor in their front yard, or sitting by their swimming pool in the backyard? And it's a lot harder to be accurate with a rifle than it is a shotgun. It just doesn't make any sense on any level to think that you need that to protect your family and your home. It's not the proper home defense weapon to have.
Yeah, I mean,
And pistols, pistols are it is not easy to be proficient with a pistol. You can go to the range and you can hit the target at 25 meters, and you can get most of them within the lines. But you got to practice in that. And again, that's in a controlled, calm environment. Once you add to that somebody running at you with a gun or shooting the people around you with a gun, it just puts it into a whole different category.
Yeah, my neighbor had an MP5 that can do it 30 rounds in a grouping about like that. I'm moving too. Which would be legal.
It's like it's like the people that say, well, if those people in the theater in Aurora would have been armed, hard telling how many people would have been shot. You can imagine, in a crowded theater
In the dark.
Pardon me? In the dark. Oh yeah, and people running. How do you know who
Batman's
the shooter
still
is?
up there.
Yeah.
So where does this end up? You're going to come up with a bill. Presumably the Senate will have its version.
There'll be more than it won't be one.
Well,
there'll
okay,
be
you'll
a
come up
bunch of
with a
bills.
plan. The Senate will come up with its plan. The administration will come up with its plan. You put them all together. You stir up the pot. What comes out in the mix? What does the president actually end up signing?
Well, I think that you're going to see a lot more than a lot of people suspect, and a big part of that is public opinion. The public, look at the numbers. Even the NRA members, it's like 92% or 84% of the NRA want background checks. And how do you argue? You've got Wayne LaPierre at one end that says no background checks. One goose step to his left is Eric Cantor saying that the House Republicans are open to the idea. And then the rest of the American people want background checks. I cannot imagine that a background check bill does not become law. Gun trafficking, everybody's for fixing the gun trafficking loophole. Straw purchases, I haven't heard of anybody, especially after these two firefighters were killed, where this woman did a straw purchase for this ex-con. That really highlights the
And how specifically do we crack down on that in a way that's preventative, or is it just a matter of stiffer penalties for those who do?
Well, a big part of it is not just what we do in statute. A big part of it is to make sure that local law enforcement across the country realize that if somebody does a straw purchase, or if a felon a prohibited person tries to buy a firearm, that there's some consequence to that.
Right.
And what I've been told by local law enforcement is, hey, cops would rather catch a felon with a gun than a felon with a piece of paper.
Right.
And that mindset has to be changed, because if you've got a guy that just got out of the pen and has that momentary memory loss, oh, I forgot I just spent 6 years in Folsom, and goes in and tries to buy a gun, he's not buying that gun for to give to his mom for Mother's Day. You know, that there's some mischief in his motivation, and local law enforcement in every state needs to understand that, and they need to go after these guys. And that's the one thing that the NRA is spot on this in this debate. We do not do a good job doing that. We need to.
It sounds like overall what you're seeing is in terms of what's doable and not doable at this point. It seems like a separation between, I guess I've been spending too much time near Silicon Valley, between the software and the hardware. It's the administrative things have a good chance. I know, you know, the background checks, straw purchasers, stuff, beefing up the NICS system in an appropriate way.
Salt magazines, I think that's
you think that's the one thing that's
there's a lot of crossover support from that. There's a lot of House Republicans already on record saying that they agree that there needs to be some movement there.
Okay.
And what kind of timing are we looking at, Mike? I mean, realistically?
You know, this year.
Will it be incremental, or will it be moving as a package?
I don't think it goes as a package, and I could be wrong, because I think it's going to take individual efforts to gin up support for individual pieces.
Would that change if, God forbid, we had another one of these things in the midst of, as it's moving along, would it?
One thing that is, you hear this from the distractors a lot. They say there's not one thing in this package that would have prevented the Connecticut tragedy. And what we do can't be a response to the last tragedy. And we need to remember that. There's 32, 33 people a day, you know, are killed with firearms. And we don't want another disaster. We don't want the ones that we've had. The Newtown tragedy changes the dynamics a lot. This really was a shot in the gut to the American people, and you can see it in the polls, you can see it in your constituent mail, you can see it in their town hall meetings, you can see it when you go out to the Rotary Club or wherever you go as an elected official. So that's kind of changed it already, and I suspect if there are other tragedies, it's going to pile on the pressure to do it. But heaven forbid that we have that. We've got to fix this before. And whatever we do, there's no guarantee that it's going to put an end to all tragedies, but it's going to help. If you can do a better job keeping the guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them, it's going to help. But there's always going to be situations. The latest one was this cop in L.A. County. That's a guy who clearly should not have had a gun, but had a bunch of them. And I think that sparked some discussion as to review of people who leave law enforcement and whether or not they should be able to keep the guns that they have. But the provisions in existing law for law enforcement, if you can get guns, and it's different than if any one of us were to go buy a gun.
And what's your thinking on that?
Pardon me?
What's your thinking on that? What should be
I
done?
think they should have a review. Yeah, if someone is booted from the police force because they've got problems, I don't think you boot them. So by the way,
especially that police force.
By the way, you forgot your assault weapons.
Yeah. But only if they're booted.
Pardon me?
Only if they're booted.
Well, there would have to be a reason for prohibiting something.
If they just decide to retire or leave or whatever.